Welcome everyone to Already Cancelled. I am Peter, that is Connor, and we are going to talk about Star Trek The Next Generation, Season 4, Episode 23. It's called The Host. So full spoilers for the episode as always. This episode is a Dr. Crusher romance episode. Although notably, it's a Dr. Crusher romance episode that actually introduces something that will in time become very important to Star Trek mythology.
Yeah, I got it right when I predicted that at the end of the last episode.
I don't remember that, but I'll take your word for it. So she's in love with this guy named Odan. He's a diplomat. He's an ambassador who's there to mediate between two warring moons of a planet. Honestly, that part's fairly inconsequential. It just happens to be what he's there for, what's going on. And he seems to solve it by the end, or at least starts the process of solving it by the end. But she's in love with him, and they're head over heels for each other, but he's insistent that he won't go through the transport. He insists on being put in a shuttle to go down to one of the moons or to the planet to do these peace talks. And when the shuttle gets attacked and he gets injured, they discover that he is in fact a Trill, that the body is merely a host, and that the Trill itself is fine. And can survive, which leads to Riker volunteering to become a new host temporarily, whilst the permanent host is shipped to them from wherever the Trill keep their volunteers.
The homeworld, I guess.
I don't know. There's volunteers. Which I suppose that's one thing, is like, it's like, oh, the body's dying, but I'm actually okay. Was a bit odd to me. I'm like, well, yeah, but surely you still respect the people who have like given their bodies up for you to inhabit. Surely it's still a little bit sad that the person who was your host is dead. So, does that not still matter? There was no sadness or remorse about that, which I thought was a bit weird. But that is the gist of the episode. And I suppose I'll ask the question, Connor, what did you think of The Host?
I thought it was mostly very tedious, it's interesting because we know some of this stuff comes back and is, somewhat important, but it's a Crusher romance episode, isn't it? Let's be honest, and that's where its focus is.
I'm not going to defend it that much, because I don't think it's very good, ultimately.
But
the ideas are good. The execution's the flawed part.
That's fair.
And what I mean by that is that it tackles a lot of interesting subjects that unfortunately hinders on me actually buying into the romance of Crusher and this Odan. And so when she's saying that she's in love with them, and it's like it's breaking her heart that he might be dying, and then the things that come up from it. There's a couple of scenes in particular where there's some really melodramatic music playing. One scene where Crusher is sitting with Troy in 10 Forward, and she's talking about the first love of her life, and it's just an amusing story about this boy she had a crush on when she was like 9. But as they're telling each other these stories, this, like, I thought the music in this episode was especially over the top and kind of intrusive.
It was, yeah.
And it was really going for it, and I'm like, it's really trying its hardest to make me feel something for this plot. And I just, the romance, see if he'd been a character for even 3 episodes, and we'd built up a little bit in the background this romance between them before we did this episode, it would have way more impact. It would have way more weight to it. As it is, it kind of unfortunately takes the weight out from underneath the premise of the episode, because the sad thing is that the episode actually deals with some very forward-thinking ideas that, while this show has typically been a very progressive show and talked about a lot of interesting ideas, the subject of, who is she in love with? Is she in love with the physical body of the person she met, or is she in love with the mind of the person she met? And once that person's in Riker, it raises this whole interesting question of, well, this Odan's in Riker and wants to be passionate with her, and she's like, no, you're Riker. Like, I know Riker. This is weird and different and all these things. And while Riker did volunteer to be a host for a day for the new host to come, I don't know if he quite gave the consent to use his body as a sex toy. On
top of that, I don't think he realized the extent of which he would not be him.
He's been very noble. Yes, there's one part of his personality slips through at one point where Picard notices just one line of dialogue where he's like, "Oh, you sound like Riker there for a second." How fascinating. But
yeah, because as soon as he wakes up, as Odan in Riker's body, it's immediately, Odan, and Crusher's like, oh, we didn't see this coming.
But you have that idea, but then you have the other idea, which is the kind of almost a joke ending in a way, even though it doesn't treat it too jokey, but it's a sort of joke moment when it first is introduced, where Crusher's actually come to accept the idea, okay, he's going to be a new host, and we've heard Odan speak to Picard about possibly asking her to leave Starfleet to be his wife and whatever, and in walks the new host, and it's a woman. It's the same species as whatever the male host was that he had at the start, but it is a woman. And Crusher sort of turns around and sees her and is like, oh dear, this presents a problem. And we skip to after the operation that puts the symbiote in the host, and so this new version of Odan comes to speak to Crusher, and I actually thought this scene might be the best scene of the episode because it addressed this with a fair bit of tact that I don't think I was expecting, and it's not because this show's not earned it. It's just that the subject of something that is anyway related to, I don't know, it's kind of tying into the idea of trans. It's tying into a couple of different things. But Crusher has this little speech where she says, it's probably a failing of humans that this amount of change is not something that I can accept. That I part of what I'm attracted to, part of what I love is these things, and part of that is, and she doesn't actually verbalize all this, but it's kind of implied in what she's saying, is that part of that is that you're a man, and it admits that maybe it's a failing, maybe one day that won't be an obstacle anymore, but it is, unfortunately it is. And Odan accepts this and says, well, clearly I won't push you because clearly there's a line here that you can't get past. Like, maybe you could get past me being in some other dude's body, sure, but you can't get past this. This is just too different. And it raises this idea of all these questions of, are you attracted to, what part of sexuality is physical, and what part of attraction and love is physical, what part of it is just about someone's personality and who they are, and so on and so on. Which Troy tries to compare to loving her father, which I thought was weird. Because the first man I ever loved was my father. But I mean, I get what you're saying, Troy, but it sounded a bit weird.
Doesn't seem as healthy a comparison in this scenario, does it?
Bit odd.
I mean, even that first time when Crusher is telling Troy the story about the crush, it's it's all about this physical attraction.
Is that why they call it the Crusher? Because she has crushes. There's crushing happening.
I saw that flash across your brain for a second. And you pause. You
had to use the word crush. You had to use the word crush. That was your fault.
You used the word crush earlier.
Yes, but I rolled through it like a pro.
So did I. I didn't stop. You're the one who hesitated and was like, "Oh, I've got this now."
Yeah, but I was listening to you speak, so I acknowledged it.
Well, clearly I'm the better man here.
If you don't want me to listen to you speak, I'm on board with that request. But but this is what happens.
Well, I think I'd made my point, and then you just had to just do that instead. But my point was, like I say, even that earlier story, it was physical attraction. So it's clearly a large part of any sort of partnership for her. It's kind of baked in to her personality throughout the episode, at least. Pretty consistent.
Now, obviously, I think watching this now, when the new host is a woman and not a man, I think any modern audience now watching this thinks of a trans person. They think of someone who's in a relationship where the partner, either comes out as trans or is trans and transitions, and then the difficulties that might raise if the other person's not willing to accept that, if that goes, the other person's sexuality doesn't line up with this, whatever, right? My question: do you think that in any way was something that they, in any level, were thinking about when they wrote this episode, or is it just like something that happens to completely line up with that subject?
It's hard to say because it's it's not like trans people didn't exist.
Oh, of course,
then.
Of course. But I'm thinking of TV shows from later in this, in the 90s, where being trans was still just a punchline almost for a lot of comedies. It was not a subject that was taken seriously or handled with any kind of either it was a punchline or it was the premise of your serial killer. Was the two things that basically it was in the 80s and 90s.
Right.
So
I would say I don't know if they were writing it with this, that as a parallel. But I do think they were at least aware of the public perception. That's why they don't crack any jokes. Like the closest it gets to cracking a joke, and I laughed a little bit because, but it's not like a direct joke at the expense of anyone. It's when Odan in the new body is like, "I love you," and Crush is just like, "So anyway," and just moves right on. And it was just like this awkward moment, but that was funny. But again, wasn't at their expense. So
sure, yeah,
I think it was very tactfully dealt with.
I agree, it was tactful. It's in the same way that I did kind of chuckle a little bit when they revealed the new host at the end before Crusher turned round, because I knew this was going to be an issue. It was like, oh, she's just kind of become to accept, but she's clearly not considered the idea. Because I was thinking even before they walked in, I was thinking, oh, it's going to be a Klingon or something. I was thinking it was going to be another species that was completely different. I was going really Star Trek and alien with it. So when it turned out just to be a woman, or, well, technically it's an alien woman still, but it's the same species as the original host.
Yeah.
It was actually a simpler twist, if you want to call it that. It was a simpler, more human twist.
You do laugh when the reveal happens, but again, I think it's important that it's not at the expense of any transitioning a body from that character. It's we're laughing at Crusher's not expecting it, and it's her reaction that we're finding funny.
It's the anticipation of her reaction that we're finding funny.
Yes, because when you see it happening, but she doesn't turn around right away, so she hasn't Crusher hasn't seen it and doesn't know what's happening, but we do as an audience. That's when there's a moment of it being funny, because we're waiting to see what she does. And
I don't think this villainizes Crusher, but I do think the episode almost, if you think about it, and this is why I think, at least conceptually, there's a lot of good stuff in this episode, even if the final result's not that great, is that by doing the whole thing with Riker, by having Riker become the host and having all these scenes with her sort of solely, eventually, she's really mad at first and she struggles with it, but eventually she does kiss him. It cuts away. I don't know if it implies they're having sex.
I don't think so.
In that transition, that would feel a bit unfair to Riker, I think, if his body was used for that. But
can make a support group with Data.
But I don't. But I don't think this is. And I like the Data volunteered first. Obviously, it wouldn't work because he's not, biological. But I like that anyway. But I think the thing that it kind of raises, right, without villainizing Crusher, it's more just sort of exploring kind of how we are. But I do think it's worth mentioning that it takes a lot for Crusher to accept the idea that, oh, well, he's changed body and that's really weird. But it's changed to another hunky man, right? It's changed to William Riker. There's the sex icon of every teen girl's bedroom from, 1987 through 1994, give or take, right? He's a sex god. Look at him, right? And it takes that much of her to accept it in this, and then eventually, well, you know what, you're still quite a handsome man, so I suppose but the second it becomes anything that's not another attractive man that is more familiar in something that she can look to, immediately it becomes a problem. So I do think there's kind of an interesting, again, just a little bit of like human analysis going on about how we look at people and about how what we find as beautiful, what we find as comfortable.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting that I don't think, again, it doesn't villainize her in the sense that it's not because that it's a female body that's the problem. I think if it would have been like some ugly guy, it would have had the exact same response from her of like, no, I can't get past this. Because, again, like I said, I think it establishes that for her, physical attraction is a big part of it.
Yeah. I don't think that an ugly guy would have been a bit of a harder thing to do at the end of the episode, though.
It would have been, as an audience, we'd have been looking at it going, okay, this feels a bit weird.
And what do you mean? I mean, how ugly are we talking here?
I don't mean hideous. I just mean to her, like, I just mean to her is someone who is unattractive.
All right.
So you walk in. She finds the first guy attractive.
So you walk in, right? You walk in at the end of this episode.
Sure, let's go with that.
And she looks at you, and she's like, "Oh no, I can't be with a ginger. I'm already ginger. This is
it's a recipe for disaster."
Which, by the way, her doctor's log at the start of the episode, she tells us that we get an info dump about Wesley's school happenings.
It's like, oh, I finally heard from him. I was like, oh, did we have to?
He's doing well in this, but he's still struggling. And it was like really specific subjects. I'm like, shut up. No one cares about Wesley's like alien archaeology class. Go away. Stop it right now.
He'll have so much to talk about with Picard, isn't he?
Well, that was the other thing when where was it? Is Adon? I've forgotten his name now. We've just been calling him the host. Odan. When Odan is trying to raise the questions with Picard about Crusher, like, I'm quite fond of Dr. Beverly. How devoted is she to staying with Starfleet? Do you think? And Picard's clearly a little bit uncomfortable because there has been a bit of a deep friendship and often a little flirtatious or potential spark between him and Crusher. So there's a little bit there that they play with. So I think it actually quite smartly plays into the other characters on the show and what their roles are with Beverly. But it's just the core melodramatic, really shoving down our throats of how much of this is love really fell flat.
That first 15 minutes where it's her just going around in a lovesick daze, and then all the talking with Troy was just insufferable to watch.
No, absolutely. The moment it gets watchable is the moment where it's like, oh, he's a host and there's a Trill in him. Okay, that's when you woke up, and it's like, okay, now we're doing things. Now we've got interesting things to explore. We get questions to ask. We get character dilemmas to deal with. Yeah. And Odan's trying to, as Riker, get the peace treaty talks going. You'd think they'd stall him a little bit just so they don't have to explain the change again, because obviously this Riker is a very temporary solution. To the point where Picard, when they realise that the host isn't going to get there in time, he just abandons the plan. Says, "We'll be back. Let's just warp 9. Let's try and meet this ship, halfway, so we can get this thing out of Riker."
I get that. I will say though, by the time they've convinced the two delegates from the moons that no, this is him, I don't think it's then, and that he was also his father, that one of them knew and dealt with years ago. I think at that point it'll be easy enough for them to accept there's another new body in a couple of days. Yeah,
probably. I think he should at least mention it. Like, by the way, this is just a temporary body. Next time you see me, I'm probably going to look different.
Maybe he should have done.
I suppose it's something to be fair, warn them.
They did say it was the job of the woman who was from the planet to kind of get them on board and explain this to them. So maybe she told them it was just going to be a temporary body anyway. So maybe they already knew that.
Yeah, maybe. And there's not much of a resolution to that side of things. It's not really the important part of the episode. It's just, and maybe that's part of the problem as well. It's kind of there to just sort of be a reason for his presence. That itself never becomes a compelling plot with any kind of real payoff outside of just he's good at what he does.
I think what's frustrating is it has potential as an idea for an episode, of Next Gen, where you've got this arbitration between the two moons, and it's the situation's escalating. It sounded potentially interesting. We don't get enough of it for it to actually be interesting or compelling, but there was enough there where I was like, oh, I could do with spending more time on this instead.
I actually think the main plot is interesting though. Like the actual main ideas that they're dealing with the Trill are perfectly interesting. The problem here is not the core concepts. The problem is the having to dangle it all in this romance with Crusher and trying to make it to be this extreme and this this emotional for her this quickly, which is where I say this is maybe one of the failings of it being so episodic and week by week, is that having just him be around and have the relationship sort of progress a little bit for a little while before this episode would have meant a great deal, or enhanced that quite a bit.
It would, and for as progressive as it is, and we've talked about this before, this is yet another example of the one, here's your Crusher episode, and it's just another romance plot.
Yeah, no, it is a problem. It is a problem that the female characters do seem to get mostly stuff with romance episodes. Yeah. There are exceptions, but that does seem to be kind of almost the typical thing.
I do think on the scale of romance episodes, this is on the better, more interesting end, for sure. But it is still, it's another one for Troy or Crusher. It's all they seem to get. Yeah.
Sometimes, I did enjoy. It's not really. It wasn't really a Troy episode, but she was kind of the second main character in it. The first Barclay episode, I would argue, was not like a romance plot per se, in the traditional sense. Anyway, he was obsessed with her, but it wasn't. That's not what it was.
Right, but I also wouldn't say that's a Troy episode.
No, I concur that that's. I say it's kind of her episode just in the sense that she's the main character who's the most relevant, but it's actually Barclay's episode, which was actually the ballsy thing about that one, is that they created a new character and said, this is your episode. You get the spotlight for the whole thing.
Yeah, they've done that a couple of times now.
Yeah. Which is ballsy, and I think I can appreciate that. But I guess that's the other thing with Odan as well as a character, is that I don't know if we ever really get much from who he is outside of just how much he loves Crusher. Like, that's really all his character is. So there's nothing for
nothing
us
as to why she cares about him either.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is there's nothing that we get to see of who he is, so that we recognize him through Riker, and then other than what he calls Crusher, because I think Frakes does a decent enough job of having different body language, of acting differently.
He feels different. He feels not Riker, but he doesn't feel anything specific.
Yeah, because we don't know Odan well enough to really recognize anything that's him. So I think that's maybe a fault of the execution as well, and maybe that time could have been better spent with this character. I think one of the most interesting parts of it is ultimately by the end, the romance side is very interesting, because you can explore how someone would treat this character who has moved from one body to the other. Those are very interesting things, but I almost think that's a separate episode entirely from just convincing us and doing an episode of introducing the Trill as well to begin with, where we get to see Riker be this character. So if we spent the first 10 minutes, instead of doing the romance, or at least using it in a smarter way to let us get to know this character, because ultimately all I really felt we got was how much he loves Crusher, and how he kept saying that he loved her, and how they're trying to hide from Data. And
I couldn't tell you anything about his personality.
It's a pretty blank slate for the most part.
I don't know. Does he have any interests? Don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's a bit of a...
No, but I think you could... Like, I don't know why Crusher is attracted to him beyond the physical elements here, because there is nothing about his personality that tells us, what she likes. There's nothing, we like doing this together, some sort of shared interest. There's nothing there that even gives me anything to go on.
Yeah, which, again, isn't super... That isn't a big deal, necessarily. The problem is, though, is if you're trying to interest it in one episode, you kind of have to give us like a simple hook. You have to give us something simple to latch onto. I don't know if that's as big of a deal, if it's just a sort of gradual thing again, where you're just sort of like, she's seen a guy, it's going well.
Right. I think when the start of this episode, it's like head over heels in love, right? That's kind of the way it's selling it. The
first shot of it, once we cut inside the ship, is them kissing. That was the very first shot of the episode.
Yeah, and then you have, like, she's in like the spa, and Troy's like, everyone could see you glowing and whatever. But I have no idea what they talk about as a relationship, anything. And I think that you can get away with that in a lot of other romance episodes here, but because this is specifically essentially like a body swap, you have to give us something that goes, okay, this tells me who this is when they're in a different body, so that I can see why she can see past Riker's face and really see Odan under there, because I don't buy it ultimately when it's just, like I say, it's just the one thing that he calls her, and that's it. I don't really see this other person ultimately.
The problem with what you just said there is, and this is not necessarily defending the episode, I think this is actually a problem with the episode perhaps, but the problem with that is that if the point of the episode, at least from Crusher's side, is to kind of learn and realize that the physical side is kind of a big part of the attraction, and maybe that's all it is, and that'd be an okay lesson for her to learn, is that's what this was. She fell for someone, and it was just raw attraction, nothing wrong with that. But I don't think the episode actually plays it that way. It feels like a sort of murky middle ground where that's there, but they're also saying there's also a deep emotional connection.
Yes.
Outside of them just saying it, we're not really seeing it. I mean, sure, you can have actors kiss each other and whatnot, but it doesn't necessarily convince us of anything outside of they like to kiss. So,
right.
Yes. So, yeah, I do want to say that conceptually, and some of the ideas that it's poking at, it feels very well intentioned, and I think that that's commendable. I inherently want to defend it a little bit from you, because I knew you were going to come in hating this.
I don't hate it. Let me make that clear. I hate the first 10 minutes.
Uh-huh.
But, like I say, I found it tedious because everything was through the lens of this romance, but I don't hate it.
Okay. So, there you go. That's the host. Not the best, but I do, there's definitely some interesting things that's probably in that. And the Trill, from what I know, will become a big deal in Deep Space Nine. So this was at least an important seed for future stuff. So next time on Star Trek: The Next Generation, the episode's called "The Mind's Eye." Here's the description on IMDb. Geordi is brainwashed by the Romulans to assassinate a Klingon governor. No, okay, that sounds all right.
Well, that sounds interesting.
that sounds a little interesting. Little
So
Manchurian,
we've only got,
little Manchurian candidate in here.
yeah, we've only got that one more, and then the whatever part 1 they're ending on, right? For the season.
Aye, whatever. I don't know.
Yeah.
This is 24. We're going into yes.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, nice to know that maybe we'll have a good couple at the end potentially.
Yeah. You say that as if we've been having a drought.
No, we haven't. But it's nice to know that the last little bit is gonna potentially feel like it's gonna have some end on a high note.
All right. So somehow even you saying that sounds like a really negative thing to say.
It wasn't.
It's like hoping for something better, just kind of showing how cynical you actually are most of the time. I don't know. There's a weird thing here. Maybe it's just you. I can hear it in your voice. I can't hear your voice and not just hear miserable cynicism. That is that is the host. Let us know what you thought of this episode in the comments below. Like and subscribe, all that stuff. Very important on YouTube. It is the thing that helps us the most. But you can, of course, support us financially over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV for as little as $1 per month and get some bonuses for your trouble. So go and have a look and see if you want to do that and help keep all the content coming. Catch us on Twitter at mail_fuzz for updates and whatnot. But otherwise, that is us. So thank you once again for watching and listening. We always appreciate it. Keep watching Star Trek. And somewhere out there, Wesley's acing some subjects and he's failing others.